They said it couldn't be done. I said it couldn't be done, but I've done it. I have done it. I have created a build that is an all content Chaos 20 intense difficulty viable build focused on Stabbomancer's Ghostblade. The GhostWeaver. This build is special to me, and this will actually be the very first build video that I've ever put out. And the only reason why I'm doing this is because this build is special to me. This one is a lot of fun. I came up with this concept. It's the first time I've ever actually theory crafted a Borderlands franchise build out the gate when the games first come out. And I wanted to put this video out there because the GhostWeaver is so much fun to play. The whole concept came about when Wonderlands first unveiled their classes and the action skills and the concept behind each of the classes were revealed. I thought to myself that the Spellshot and the Stabbomancer sound so cool. I want that to be my first multi-class. And I was taking a look at everything and I thought, you know what? This Ghostblade action skill combined with these Spellweaving stacks are going to be a lot of fun. So I put a poll out on Twitter and I let the community decide what the name of this build would be. And I said, this will be my multi-class for Stabbomancer Spellshot. It will focus the Ghostblade action skill and it'll utilize the Spellweaving stacks. What do you think? And I gave a bunch of options and overwhelmingly, the most popular option was GhostWeaver, and here it is. I really enjoy builds that can go through, do some mobbing, can also take on a boss without having to do crazy amounts of combinations for synergies, without having to switch over different gear, can just use what it uses and kind of go about everything throughout the game. This GhostWeaver build can do that. It can go through the mobs, it can go through the obelisk bosses, the story bosses, all pretty easily. It can go through the chaos chambers, even do the secret raid bosses without too much effort. However, it is not something that you're going to see one-shot bosses. It's not going to do massive amounts of damage. It's more of a ticking away melt boss kind of a character than it is just punishing and putting out tons and tons of damage. For the raid bosses on Chaos 20 on intense difficulty, you do have to play with the mechanics of the raid bosses versus just being able to plow through them like you might see other builds do. But it is a lot of fun. It can go through just about anything in the game. However, it is squishy. It is a squishy build. It requires a lot of movement speed. So keep that in mind before you decide whether or not this is something that you would like to do. If it is a build that you're looking for that can kind of do a little bit of everything and work on action skills as well as guns and spell damage, the GhostWeaver might be something that you want to check out. So by now you're probably wondering, what the heck is the GhostWeaver and why should I care about it? So I'm going to go in and show you the actual gameplay mechanics and the combat loop, and to show and demonstrate how this build works and why it's a lot of fun to play. First thing is, as soon as you load into the game, make sure to increase your Spellweaving stacks to the maximum. I have 5 by default, 1 point into high thread count, and my armor gives me another point into high thread count, so I can get a total of 11. Now, I walk around with the Catatumbo, one, because it's a pretty strong gun. Even after the nerf, it's still a lot of fun to use, and it's got a really fast reload, so I can do damage to the enemies with the lightning bolts. It's a lot of fun, but as soon as I get into where I want to do a lot of damage, I cast out the Ghostblade. And as you can see, as you whip out the Ghostblade on each of the different enemies, it pretty much kills each mob, no matter if they're elite or not, in one single Ghostblade summon. Now, as soon as the Ghostblade goes away, which will happen if you're casting it out a lot, you want to cast your spell to get the cooldown from the third amulet. And there's even a nice little interaction where you can do a fake cast to get that cooldown even faster if you want to. Now, this is a very, very squishy build. You have glass cannon from the Spellshot's tree, so your ward does not regenerate, and you don't have a whole lot of health going for you. So the Ghostblade I have on is getting dark magic from the Spellblade to help regen health here and there, but mostly your survivability comes from being mobile. The Stabbomancer has a haste skill to get your movement speed up, and you have swift death to do more damage when you're moving faster. So it's really important to make sure to stay mobile so that you're not in one spot and you don't just die immediately as soon as someone hits you with anything. Now, make sure that you're keeping your spellweaving stacks up by constantly reloading your weapon or by casting your spells. And as long as you've got your max stacks, you're going to be doing your max amount of damage. You can continuously cast out your Ghostblade to the enemies that you want to kill. And then as soon as that Ghostblade goes back down on cooldown, you can do your spells and make sure to kind of abuse the cooldown of the Thurge to get that Ghostblade down and cast it over and over and over. That is the combat loop of the Ghostblade. Keeping your spellweaving stacks up, firing your guns and your spells when the Ghostblade's not attacking, and surviving by moving around. If you don't move around, you're gonna die. Make sure that you're moving around and meleeing whenever you get close to someone, because that Spellblade with Echo is gonna do a lot of damage as well. And that's the gameplay. Now that you've seen a bit of what the Ghostblade can do, we're going to go over the gear, and we're going to keep this pretty darn simple. The main pieces that make this build even viable is to synergize with the Spellweaving stack so that you can increase your spell damage, and that converts to everything else so that you just get stronger and stronger for every Spellweaving stack you get. First thing, most important, is the Spellblade. Here I have a volatile version that's dark magic. I've got the Echo on it as well, so that if I do get close to an enemy or I want to do a little bit more damage to the boss, I can shoot the boss, I can cast spells on it, do the Ghostblade, and then run up and melee to get a bunch of extra damage from the Echo. But the most important part here is that your Ghostblade gets the damage and attack speed from your melee weapon. Now the Spellblade also does something interesting where melee attacks deal spell damage instead of melee damage. So the melee damage from the Ghostblade is converted into the spell damage, which is boosted by the Spellweaving stacks. Not only that, but we combine that with the Paradigm armor here. Melee damage and ability damage are increased by 50% of your increased spell damage. So we're kind of double dipping into that spell damage synergy. Combine that along with the Bad Egg, where we get a bit of movement speed and some melee damage and bonus dark magic whenever the ward is depleted. We also have Roid on this shield, so we get 20% melee damage while the ward is depleted. And then as far as weapons go, for the most part, I've kept this relatively the same even post nerfs of all of the weapons that we've seen. I was using a liquid cooling, and you can use that. It's still viable for boss killing. But I've had a lot of fun with the Queen's Cry even after the nerf, because it is just a lot of fun to use, and the spell damage helps to increase the damage of the Queen's Cry a little bit. For mobbing and some more fun melee stuff, I will put a live wire in the hands. White Rider's good for those armored enemies. The single beam still feels really, really good on it. And Catatumbo is just a lot of fun. Really fast reload time, so it's really good for building your spellweaving stacks. Another important piece of this is the Thurge Amulet. This one, whenever you cast a spell, reduce your remaining action skill cooldown by 20%. This one is pretty important because we want to be casting Ghostblade as much as possible. So casting spells whenever this is equipped is really, really important to get that cooldown. Now, I've been using this channel cast laser hand. One, because the cooldown is really fast, and two, because the channel cast can help you get your cooldown faster with the Thurge. If you do the fake casting, just by bringing the spell up, you trigger that 20% cooldown. Nice little piece to kind of abuse if you want to. If you don't want to use this, a good alternative are the Ice Spikes that have multi-charges, the Arc Turrets that have multi-charges. Arcane Bolt's one of my favorites. It's got a really fast cooldown, and you can even get one with 2 charges on there if you want to. Pretty good spell. I like the laser hand. This one's a lot of fun to line enemies up and hit multiple at a time. It does hit pretty hard. Once you charge it to full, you get an automatic spell critical hit. Pretty cool spell there. Not a ton of people use it, so that's another reason why I like to use it. It's just fun and unique. The spells, I go with the Championship Ring for dealing damage to a boss, increases your effects, and your Mood Ring to do while ward is not full, effects are increased. We are never going to have a full ward except for when we first spawn in. Other than that, we don't regenerate ward. We're not going to have a full ward. This one's really good. For the effects here, Spellshot power is the most important thing you can get on anything. So having volatile versions of your amulet and volatile versions of your armor, really important because that's where the majority of the Spellshot power comes from. The dark magic damage is what I'm using on this amulet because it synergizes with the blade, and it's the only way I can really get my health back and have a little bit of survivability. If you want to crank out more damage, you would want to swap out your Spellblade to a different element and match it up with the amulet here. For the rings, the passives we've got are melee critical hit damage, action skill cooldown rate, and spell critical hit damage. This could be better. The passives that I've got for this and gun magazine size here and even area damage here, those don't help the build at all. So these passives could be better. If these were god roll items, then you would see a lot more power being cranked out from things like spell damage here or melee, even melee damage. Gun magazine size is not great. Gun damage would be better, or spell or melee damage. Anything that would help the build at all. Gun magazine size is actually a detriment because we want to reload more often to keep those stacks of Spellweaving up, not less often. So going over the skill tree for the Stabbomancer Spellweaver, the important parts here, Spellweaving stacks from the Spellshot is the passive. The Ghostblade is the action skill that we're using. This one does say that the Ghostblade, which spins in place, deals melee damage based upon your equipped melee weapon. So again, the damage and the swing speed from the melee weapon that you're using is what determines how often and how hard the Ghostblade hits. It scales off of melee damage, but as we explained, the Spellblade and the Paradigm kind of help to swap that melee damage over to spell damage. For the skill points here, the most important part of the Stabbomancer tree, I think, is using the haste with the swift death. So we're getting melee attack speed and movement speed out of haste. Super good for all of the stuff that we're doing with Ghostblade and our melee attacks. The swift death means the faster you move, the greater the bonuses. Then we're dealing damage at 10% of default walk speed. We've got melee damage, gun damage, and spell damage increasing here, which is our 3 forms of damage sources. Here we're using exploit their weaknesses, and we're combining this with Alchemical Agent. Alchemical Agent will apply random status effects based upon the Ghostblade hitting melee critical hits. So you will hit a boss and put a whole bunch of status effect damage on them. Each time that it applies a status effect, it's going to add 6% damage from all sources based on exploiting their weaknesses. So you get 3 or 4 elements in there, all of a sudden you're doing a ton more damage because they're getting that debuff. We're using Nimble Fingers because we want the fire rate and spell damage, mainly the spell damage out of this one. And we're using a few extra points here in Sneak Attack. To be honest, these 3 points could probably be put anywhere. I put them in the critical hit damage. They don't matter a ton. You can be pretty flexible here. One thing to take note is that the Ghostblade does not work with follow-up, and the 1,000 cuts won't get a ton of extra damage because you're not going to have a full 25 stacks very often. As far as the points go for the spell shot, we want to get down to this 1 slot 1 kill. So you put 3 points here in magic bullets to convert spell damage into gun damage. Use the reload speed because we want to have the fastest reload possible to get the most stacks of Spellweaving as possible. I used a little bit of just warming up. A lot of this is coming from the armor I'm using. Mostly putting points into Font of Mana for the action skill cooldown, a little bit of spell cooldown. We don't want to use mage armor because we can take that point and use it somewhere else. The glass cannon is really important because we're getting 30% spell damage. We don't automatically regain our ward anymore, but it increases our spell damage by a ton. The most important part is we're putting points in Prestidigitation and Font of Mana and some in Just Warming Up to get down to high thread count. This is the most important point in the Spellshot tree because it takes our high thread count from 5 of base to an extra 3 with the 1 point. Our armor gives us another point in this, so we have a total of 6 Spellweaving stacks being added to our base count of 5. Used Imbue Weapon because we can imbue weapon with our bonus damage from our spell, and that gives us down to where we need to be for 1 slot 1 kill, which means we gain gun damage for every stack of Spellweaving, which 11 stacks gives us 44% bonus damage. So you combine all that together and we have a heck ton of spell damage, and we're converting a lot of that spell damage into gun damage. So our damage sources are the Ghostblade and our guns with a little bit of spell, and boom, you have the GhostWeaver.